Hello there and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Cassie and today I have some Simon Hurley cards to share with you today. We're going to be focusing on the stamp set called Road Trip. I love this stamp set. I am feeling some kind of way about that palm tree, I'm telling you. And I love all the sentiments in this set. We're also going to be using the Scene Maker stencil, and I will pull in the Luau background stamp later on. But let's do our stamping first. I've just got a scrap piece of Simon Hurley Creates Stark White cardstock in my Mini Misty. I'm going to ink up my images with some black ink. This is the Raven Detail ink by Brutus Monroe. It's good for watercolor and for alcohol markers, and I plan to do a little bit of watercoloring today. So we're just going to stamp those out a couple times to make sure I have a good crisp image, and then we'll pull those out and we'll start doing our watercoloring. Now the watercoloring I'm going to be doing is going to be using the Simon Hurley Create inks. So I'm excited about that. And I'm using an array of inks. I have Piggyback up there and I have Rosy Cheeks, and I just have a number 4 silver black velvet paintbrush that I am going to paint all of my images with. And this is not watercolor paper per se, but you can put a little bit of water on it without causing any issues with pilling or anything like that. So keep in mind that this, like I said, isn't watercolor paper, but for what I'm doing today, it works just fine. I'm not using a ton of water. The next color I grabbed was some Guppy, and we're going to color the beak of the bird along with the giraffe. We're going to go ahead and just save ourselves a little bit of headache and color the whole giraffe that way. And next we'll paint our little bird using some Overzealous, and then we'll come in with the darker shade of later Gator. I like how all the inks just go so well together, and I love that these inks are so versatile that you can watercolor with them as well. I don't do a perfect job watercoloring. Some of my stuff goes out of the lines, but then again, most of my coloring seems to go out of the lines. And we'll color our bear with some GRRR. Can we just talk about how cute this little stamp set is? I love that you have these two little images, you know, one with a bear driving his little giraffe friend and his pup. And then we also have the bird flying the pig, and it's adorable. It just is making me want to go on vacation pretty dang bad. Especially when you throw in those palm trees. So, you know, we may have some plans to do some vacationing, but as some of y'all know, my husband works for the government, and you know, our plans get canceled all the time for all kinds of reasons. So we're used to that by now. It doesn't make it any less disappointing, but we'll see if we actually get to go to the beach coming up here fairly soon. With all the chaos going on in the world, maybe it'd just be better and easier if we were, you know, to stay home. But I'll tell you what, I am missing some sun and sand. That's for sure. All right, moving on to coloring our car. I have some bee sting that I have put onto my glass mat. I forgot to mention that I am using my glass mat. I always use my glass mat, but the glass mat works so beautifully for situations like this, because you can just put your ink pad right onto that glass mat and you don't have to worry about any staining or anything like that. When I'm done with the color, I can just wipe that up with a microfiber cloth or a baby wipe or a paper towel or whatever the case may be, and my glass mat is back to its beautiful usual self. But yeah, so I'm just grabbing that color off of there, using my paintbrush to add a little bit of shadowing and shading in certain areas, just to add a little bit of texture in there. And it's not perfect, and I like that there are some harsh lines on there just simply because of the way these images are. That's personally why I like the harsh lines there. I just think they go well together. I'm going to bring in some more of that GRRR, and I am going to color more on the bear just because I did get some red on him. And then I'm going to bring in some of the woof to add some of the gray to where they would be on a car. Clearly, I'm not coloring this car the way a car normally should be colored, but we are doing our best here. I am going to bring in some Copic colors for the tires themselves, simply because I don't have a black ink. Well, I do have black soot. I didn't think about that until just now, but instead of, I guess, grabbing that, maybe it was laziness on my part, I just decided to Copic color the tires with some of the warm gray colors. So yeah, I'll do that. You won't see me do it, but I do that. And then we'll just add a little bit more shadowing and shading in certain areas. Now we'll color in our bird's scarf with some of the bee sting. I love how vibrant that red is. It's just a pretty red. And then here's where we'll bring in some more of our GRRR. And we'll color in the rest of our giraffe, just his little spots. I wanted to wait until he was mostly dry, so that way we wouldn't have too much bleeding of the color. For the color of our air bird airplane, we're using some Remember Me, and this is a lot of surface to cover when we're talking about watercolor. So I like to try to stay pretty using the same amount of color, the same saturation, if that makes sense, because you can see in some of those areas it's a little bit darker, which is fine. I can fix that. That's easy enough. But if you're brand new to watercoloring, that can be a little bit frustrating. So I try to use the same saturation of color, and if that makes any sense. So keep it watered down, fairly watered down. And then if you do find that you've got some variation in color the way I did, you just bring in your paint again and just kind of even that out, add some shadowing and shading there. For our first card, it's going to be a slim line, so I did trim off 3.5 inches of that piece of stark white cardstock. So you end up using an entire piece of cardstock for a slim line, which is fine. And there is really not an exact measurement for a slim line. I like to cut mine to be 7.5 inches by 8.5 inches typically. And then this way I can score this at 3 3/4 roughly, and then it'll be a side folding or a top folding or however you want to do it size card. Here I'm bringing in the Scene Maker stencil, and I'm just going to use some Heffy tape. This is like a post-it tape, I suppose, so something like that would work. I just want to cover up the areas that are underneath the cloud, because sometimes when I'm sponging I get a little bit overzealous and a little carried away, and I end up having color where I don't want it. And it is possible to do it on a slim line. So here I am showing you that it is possible, that you just line your stencil up. That edge part is a flat line. So what you can do is then when you bring your stencil back over, you just line it up inside that rounded edge, just like I'm doing here. This color that I'm using is Minty Fresh. I thought this would make for some nice, very subtle clouds. And I love how that's looking. And all I'm doing for some variation in the clouds is just shifting the stencil from side to side. Another thing that you could do is flip your stencil. If you wanted to do that, you definitely want to make sure that you're cleaning off your stencil in between, because if you flip it and you already have color on the stencil, you may get some transfer, and I don't think that's what you want. So yeah, definitely if you're going to do that, just clean it off in between. I was a little lazy, so I'm just using the stencil just as it is, and I think it looks cool. I love this look, especially on a slim line. It looks really neat, and you kind of yeah, so at first I wasn't sure we could do this, but you just kind of have to manipulate your stencil a little bit, or you know, on your cardstock, to get it to look how you want it to look, and it adds this cohesion, which is just really cool. I'm tacking down my paper with a little bit of purple tape. If I had been thinking, I would have done it on the back side, just, you know, make sure, and from the beginning I would have done that, but I wasn't thinking. I was just so eager to get my stencil going on there that I couldn't wait, and I'm loving how this looks. So I'm going to add a little bit more of the clouds on the top, and then that will be ready to go. I love that. It works out so cool. That Scene Maker stencil is awesome. All right, we're going to put our panel into our Misty because I want to stamp my sentiment. I want to make sure I don't screw it up. So I've got that in there, and I'm going to ink up the sentiment with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. It's a very crisp, dark black ink. It's good for watercolor as well, but it always seems to leave such a very good crisp black impression. And then on the inside, I am going to stamp our little critters again on the inside, just using some of that Minty Fresh, so there'll be some cohesion from the outside to the inside. And then I'll use some liquid glue to adhere this down to my card panel, and it'll leave a nice white border on the top and bottom. That's one of the things I actually liked about this. And then we've put some foam tape on the back of our little critters. We'll tack those down, and then as a final bit of embellishment, I'm just going to use some clear saucer embellishments, and we'll put those all over. We're pretty liberal. I kind of wanted it to look like it was coming out of the back of the plane, almost like smoke or something, so that's why it's congregated mostly to the left or the right hand side. But that's going to finish off our first card. Love how that one turned out. For our second card, we are going to bring in the Luau background stamp. I just think this stamp is such a cool background. Simon has done some really cool things with it. And what we're going to do is basically just stamp it. But I do have some cardstock. This is the stark white, and I've cut that down to 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches and scored it at 4 1/4. And I'm going to open it back up, and I'm going to use that same Heffy tape that I used earlier, so it can be reused. and I'll set that on top, or just on the side because I want to protect the back. What I want to do is do some ink blending. So I have some Overzealous along with a mini ink blending tool, and I'm going to just blend that all over the front of my card. What you could have done is you could have just had another panel if you wanted to. Just a panel cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and you could have done this and avoided the heavy tape. But I just wanted this. I thought this would be kind of neat. Show you another way that you can use a little less paper if that's a concern of yours, and this way you don't have to adhere anything to the front of it. I'm going to leave the heavy tape on there, and now we're going to ink up our stamp using some later Gator. And I love the way this just layers right on top of the Overzealous. It just looks really, really pretty. And these greens are so vibrant. Oh, love them. So I'm going to show you a way to do it. I'm going to set it down very carefully, not move it around, take a piece of scratch paper, and then I'm just using my knuckles to rub. You don't have to rub too hard. That's the beautiful thing about red rubber, is that it tends to give a pretty good impression right out of the gate. And there you have it. So there's our background all ready to go. I'm going to stamp Road Trip right there on the bottom part. And then before I adhere my front, I'm finally learning, I'm going to do my stamping on the inside. So I'm going to ink up our car with the little critters inside with some Overzealous. And I'm going to stamp that on the left-hand side towards the bottom. I thought about the right-hand side, but we're going to do the left-hand side. And then I'm going to ink up a couple sentiments. This one says, "See you soon." I screw it up, and I didn't get the lower loop of the S, but I was able to fix that. If I had messed that up, there is a way that you could just, stamp it on another piece of paper and stick that over the top. But it worked out. And then I stamped the "Are we there yet?" on there as well. I do cover the back of the car with some foam tape, and then I'll peel off all the release paper and we'll stick our car down. And I'm not going to do any embellishments. I'm going to leave it as is because I love the way this looks. I just think this is so cool. So that finishes off card number 2. Love it. All right, moving on to card number 3. I already have some of the ink blending done. I didn't figure you'd want to see all of it simply because you did see it for the first one. We're using the cloud or the Scene Maker stencil again, using the clouds. And the colors that I chose from top to bottom would be Triple Berry, Rosy Cheeks, and then this is Over the Moon. So I'm just lining that up on there, and I love that it kind of looks like a sunset background, or could be a sunrise, depends on what you're thinking there. But I think those colors together are all super pretty. I'm going to pull out the stamp that I want, which I told you I'm feeling some kind of way about that palm tree. I love that it's a 2-step stamp. Oh, those sing to me. And so I'm going to ink it up with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And I'm going to stamp that like it's coming off the bottom. And then I'm going to stamp it again off to the side, just lowered just a little bit. And then I'm going to stamp it a couple more times on some more of the Simon Hurley Stark White cardstock. Just 2 more times. And then we'll pull out that 2-step stamp, and I'll show you how we do that. And I don't get it perfect every time. This first time I did, surprisingly. But I'm going to ink that up with the Overzealous, and then you can't really see me do it, but I'm kind of rocking just on the edges. I am not going over the entire stamp with the later Gator. I just want that on the edges, and then I'll stamp that down, and that one worked perfectly. And so I'm not even cleaning this off. I'm just going to ink it up again with the Overzealous. I'm rocking on the edges again, and then we'll stamp that down. And I'm not totally on point with this one, but I actually don't mind that. I think it looks kind of cool. It adds some highlights. Maybe not where highlights would be, but it does add some highlights. And then we'll stamp it on the other 2 palm trees that we have as well. Do a little better on that one. But once again, just inking up with the Overzealous and then rocking just the edges of the ink pad on the edges of the palm tree. And that'll add just a little bit of later Gator just to the edges of those palm tree leaves. And then we're going to pull in the GRRR, and we'll ink up our palm tree, our trunk with that, and stamp that down. And this is looking so cool. I love how that color just kind of blends on top of each other so nicely. And then we'll do the last 2, and then we're going to fussy cut those out. But before I fussy cut those out, I am going to stamp the sun. So I'm stamping that using some of that Over the Moon ink. And if I had been thinking, I would have rocked the edges maybe with some Guppy on this one, but I wasn't really thinking. And so I'll just stamp that down. And then I do decide to put this in my Misty because I want to stamp the sentiment that goes right over the top that says sending sunshine and hugs. I just love that. I think that is so cool. And it says it right on the sun itself, but it's kind of fun to kind of enhance that with the darker color as well. I did put foam tape all over my sun after fussy cutting it out, and I put foam tape all over my palm trees as well after fussy cutting those. And we'll just peel off all the release paper on one of them for now, and I'm going to stick that one down. And then my other one, this was a little trick I decided because I wanted one sticking off the edge, but I didn't want to have to stamp, an extra one. I'm just going to cut this one in half. So I end up cutting it in half, and I use the one on the one side, peel off all that release paper and put that down. And then I use the other one on the other side, so I'm getting more bang for my buck. I do end up trimming off that excess trunk because it's just, I trim off those parts, but I also trim off the excess trunk of this last little piece here just simply because it's just not necessary. So I'm going to tack down just the palm tree itself, or the leaves anyway, and then I'll trim off the part of the trunk that's sticking there because it's not necessary. And then as a final bit of embellishment, I grabbed those exact same sequins and put those down, and that's going to finish off our third card. I love, love, love how this one turned out. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the 3 cards that I made today. This stamp set's so cute, but I would love to know which one of these was your favorite. If you did in fact have a favorite, please leave that in the comment section down below. Please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as always, I will see you very soon in another video. Thank you for stopping by.